Hello and welcome. We are so happy you can join us as we kick off our 70th season with the Symphony of Southeast Texas. My name is Chelsea Tipton, I'm the music director. I'm joined by Lara St. John, our violin soloist on this evening's concert. We've got a great start to the season. We're going to be starting each of our classical concerts with a fanfare. And this year we have Jim Stephenson, who wrote a piece entitled Fanfare for Democracy, and it's a wonderful celebratory way to kick off our season. It's about 3 minutes long. It is for brass and woodwinds and also strings and percussion. It kind of reminisces a little bit like the music of John Williams, but it's great to work with also living composers. The other night in rehearsal, I had a question was posed to me about one section. I was able to ring up Mr. Stephenson and ask him those questions and get a response back. When we do music by Korngold or by Strauss or by Mozart, we don't have that luxury. So it's nice to do music by living composers, and it's a wonderful setup to our concerto that's going to be featured on the concert. Eric Korngold was a German composer?
It's German, yeah.
German composer. And have you played the piece before?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
Many times.
And could you tell us a little bit about the piece? This is my first time conducting it. I've done
really?
Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a small suite,
Yeah.
and I just love the harmonies in it. But I've always wanted to do the concerto, and this has been on our radar for a couple of years now. So we're so happy that you've come to Southeast Texas to join us. Could you talk to us a little bit about that piece?
Sure. I mean, Korngold was, like you said, he was born in Germany. He was kind of known as a bit of a child prodigy composer. He was, I think he wrote an opera when he was 10 or something, which is actually still kind of played today. And also, well, he was, of course, one of the great musicians and composers of many that were displaced by the Nazis at the time. And he came to the States and ended up in Hollywood. Okay. And because of that, he needed to support himself, obviously, and he ended up writing for a lot of films of the 40s. And particularly, as you may hear in the concerto, or at least I do, I love the movies of Errol Flynn. Like Korngold wrote Captain Blood, for example, The Great Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. And there's another film called The Prince and the Pauper, which he wrote the soundtrack for, and actually the third movement of the concerto is literally The Prince and the Pauper. I mean, it's like basically the soundtrack. So in a way, it's very, very theatrical music. It's extremely romantic, very schmaltzy, if I may use that word, and just it's very, very beautiful. And at the same time, like the first and third movements they're so exciting, and sort of if this is a word, I'm not sure, but it's kind of like the definition of swashbuckle.
Yes.
It's really it's very uplifting music.
Does the concerto lay well for the violin?
It does, yeah. I think, well, he wrote it for Jascha Heifetz in I think it's in the late 40s, early 50s, and of course Heifetz would have said, oh, this is too awkward, or you know. So I'm sure we have Heifetz to thank for the fact that it's quite violinistic.
Yeah, I did listen to the Heifetz recording.
Oh, it's such exciting violin playing.
It's just phenomenal, and
playing,
and you know, I think Heifetz premiered
yes,
the piece?
Okay, he commissioned it, I believe.
He commissioned it, okay.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to hear that's the first iteration of it. And then there's the other recordings and how it's kind of evolved. But he really threw himself into the piece.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he didn't just like phone it in.
He was very, very diligent, I'd say. Like, I mean, when he retired finally, he was... I think in his 70s, and he said, well, I have to retire because I can no longer practice 6.5 hours a day. I mean, who does that?
Did Heifetz teach as well? Did he teach?
I think he did somewhat, okay. At least he did master classes.
Yeah.
There's some, but yeah, I mean, extremely diligent and very...
Yeah, it's very interesting. This period of music, of composition, soloists, back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, it was kind of a golden age of possibility that was coming up in the 20th century for both composition and orchestra. And you think of the great conductors, the Bernstein, Eugene Ormandy. They really helped to kind of get classical music exciting here in this country as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there was a huge exodus of a lot of not only Jewish origin musicians from Europe and Eastern Europe, but in a way that played to the advantage of the States, because and Canada to an extent, because we got a whole bunch of them. And, you know, then they came here and
you're
and
Canadian.
it flourished. Yes,
Okay,
I
you're
am.
Canadian. Okay,
Yeah.
Good. So we have the concerto. We have first the fanfare, then we have the concerto, and then we have a short break with intermission, and then we go to the music of Richard Strauss. Now, this is music from his opera, Der Rosenkavalier. Opera, I think Korngold wrote some operas. Did he write some operas?
He did. Oh, yeah.
Very prolific. Korngold was a very prolific composer. Strauss is probably best known for his operas and his tone poems. Don Juan, Death and Transfiguration, but opera is really where he really strove and impacted classical music. And this suite from Der Rosenkavalier was from the opera that was written in 1910, and then in 1945, Artur Rudzinski, who was the music director of the New York Philharmonic, made this suite of the themes from the opera Der Rosenkavalier. I think it pairs nicely with the Korngold in kind of aesthetic romanticism, but also there are two things I'd point out about this. This suite is filled with waltzes, and so it's very dance-like, but also just incredible themes that work well with the vocalist, but I think they also work well just thematic music on its own. I love this piece, and the orchestra is having a great time, and it really shows off what a wonderful virtuosic orchestra we have with the Symphony of Southeast Texas. It calls for quite a large orchestra, and the other thing that made me think about it too is typically in the pit they use a small orchestra. This calls for a huge orchestra, and they're all supposed to get down in that pit. I don't know how that was even possible at that time, but somehow they made it possible. But there's a lot of layers and musical motives that are used, and lots of tone colors and timbres that Strauss really explored. Strauss was not only a composer, but he was also a reluctant conductor. So he conducted his pieces, and he looked kind of bored when he was conducting. That was not really his thing, but he was such a great composer, and he conducted, and he knew what he wanted. He knew how to conduct opera, and knew he would ask for exactly what he wanted, but he just looked kind of disinterested. But as a result, he really knows how to write for the orchestra. We have composers such as Leonard Bernstein, or Mahler, who would write every little thing you need to do, almost too much information for the players. But those are composers / conductors who really understood how the orchestra is used as an instrument. So we have the theme of our concert is enduring love. There's a certain romanticism to all the music, except maybe the fanfare. The fanfare is kind of like swashbuckling in one sense. But the other music has this tender-heartedness and this sort of bravado as well that you find throughout. It's going to be an incredible evening of music, and we're so glad that you'll come out and join us. Thank you so much for coming to our community and sharing your talents.
Oh, my pleasure.
And it's your first time in Southeast Texas, in Beaumont, Texas?
In Beaumont, it is my first time, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We thank you all for coming and joining us. We hope that you'll join us throughout the entire season. Have a wonderful, wonderful time.
Thank you.